Welcome to the 13th season of Voices in Mystery. I'm your host, Nancy Carlson, and with me today is author Sally S. Wright from Ohio. Welcome back. You've been on the show before.
I have.
You brought a new book this time, Code of Silence. What's the Code of Silence in the book?
It's a prequel. The book is a prequel to the Ben Reese series, where the major character is an archivist in a university who had been a behind-the-line scout in World War II. And this book takes place in the late 50s. His wife dies in the course of the book, and he gets sucked into investigating, when it's the last thing he feels like doing, the disappearance of an acquaintance who sends him a letter and says, if anything happens to me, you have to find out what it was, because this has international application.
That's spooky.
And it deals with a real Soviet code we called it the Venona Code. And in the 30s and 40s, they had more than 300 agents in this country, and they were communicating with them in telegrams because it was cheap, and because they knew that the code that they were using, a one-time pad code, so it's like they would write a message one day, it would be totally different the next. You can never break that kind of a code. But for 9 months in 1943, the Soviets used the same pad for every day for 9 months.
Why?
And
Why
nobody knows. Nobody knows. And nothing was known publicly in the United States about the code or what we did to try to decrypt it, which we were able to do for some codes in that 9-month period. Until the wall came down and an American archivist from the Library of Congress, who's a specialist in 20th century military history, went to the KGB archives in the Soviet Union when they opened them to the public briefly, and he found the Russian side of these 3,000 telegrams. And he wrote an article. Patrick Moynihan said, why don't we know anything about this? And the NSA began to reveal our decryptions of those messages. And the understanding of politics in the United States, international exchanges during the 40s and 50s, the Venona Code just adds insight into that none of us had any idea of what we knew and what we didn't know and what was going on.
So everything you just told us about the code is true.
Oh, yes.
And you just wove that into the story of the... And
when the decryption of the code was first done, when the first phrase, this would have been 46, as I recall, when our decryptors read the first phrase of the Soviet code, the man standing behind him, whom he had called in to help him with syntax because he was born in Russia, was in fact a Soviet agent. So immediately he was telling the Soviets that we were beginning to break those codes.
Wow.
So I mean, it's an amazing story. So this is a fictionalized version of the implications of all of that.
You sound like the kind of person that when your interest is piqued, you delve into a topic and don't let go till it turns into... What else have you researched so thoroughly that you just can talk on about it?
Way too many things. My kids could tell you, just, Mom, please. You know,
Well,
we know enough.
What other things have appeared in your books? Have you written about coins? Because I read that you're interested in old coins.
Well, I'm not, but I mean, my character is, so I had to learn certain things from my character. You know, because as an archivist in the early 60s in a university, now they specialize. Then they couldn't. You know, they had whatever was in the attics of the university that donors had given them, so they had to figure out what they were and whether they should keep them or get, you know, so he had to learn all kinds of things. So in the course of the books, each book will have something to do with one particular aspect of archival work. So it's been fascinating for me because I've learned things I never would have learned on my own and was glad I knew.
So you're not an archivist, but
No.
your character is an archivist.
Right, and he's based on a real man who's now in his mid-80s, whom I knew as an archivist. And in 1973, when I was a mere child, I said, what'd you do in the Second World War? You know, you're kind of World War II. And he said, materials evaluation. I'm like, what is that? Finally, he tells me he was a behind-the-line scout in Europe. and he worked for intelligence. He never had a band of brothers. They just shifted him wherever they needed him from one army to the next. And I went, if I ever write a mystery novel, that's the character for me. So that all those experiences the real man had as a behind-the-line scout, I've used in creating this fictional character and in giving him the background and the nightmares and the trauma that he went through. And in Watches of the Night, which is the book right before this, it's the only one where I show flashbacks to World War II, and you see the fictional Ben Reese taking scientific tech teams, which the Allies sent into German-held territory, to look for German science, Nazi science, during the Second World War. So you see Ben Reese taking a tech team, and you see how the real man, translated into the fictional Ben Reese, was really hurt and wounded and barely escaped dying in the woods of Germany.
Wow. Now you write full-time.
I do.
What are you working on now?
A new series.
Oh, really?
Yep. And the first book, I don't know how I got sucked into the Second World War, but here I am. The first book the backstory will have to do with the OSS and the French resistance during the war. But the series will have different characters, and it will be based in Lexington, Kentucky, with the horses and the horse world. And I envision each book having, there'll be characters that are continuous, but it won't be like the same protagonist. It'll be different parts of this network of people.
Do you have a background in horses?
I've just had them for a long time and loved them. I don't have a horse now. I think my riding days are over, but I still visit my last one, who threw me disastrously. So, I mean, this is not anything that will ever go away, but I don't own one at the moment.
But you can create the story of horses.
Oh, yeah.
Well, good luck on that, and thank you so much for visiting us on Voices in Mystery. And we've been visiting with Sally Wright, and her newest book is Code of Silence, on the bookshelves now. So I hope that you'll pick one up, and I hope that you'll come back onto the show. So thanks a lot, Sally.
Appreciate it.